Bailing on Billy? Why 3 coaches left Napier's staff, and what's next for the Gators? 5-star Dylan Raiola headlines the 2024 cycle, but how big is the talent gap between him and the rest of the class? And Louisville with a 5-star get on the recruiting trail, the impact of new head coach Jeff Brohm, all that and more coming up on the College Football Recruiting Show. What's up? Oh my gosh, I lost my... This has never happened before, people. Oh my gosh. You know what? Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in to the new episode of the College Football Recruiting Show. I promise the rest of the show will be a lot smoother than that. I'm dealing with a vocal cord injury. Bear with me. We're going to get through this. I'm Grace Remington, filling in for Emily Proud, alongside Blair Angulo, who probably sounds a lot better than I do today. Before we get into the show, remember to send your questions in the chat, and we will answer them at the end of the show. And the chat is sub only, so go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And while you're at it, like this video, please. And with that, let's get into today's headlines. USC and Alabama are 2 schools pushing the hardest for 2024 Ole Miss linebacker commit Jordan Lockhart. That's according to 24/7 Sports' Greg Biggins. Lockhart committed to the Rebs in January 2022 and plans on making a final decision this March. Blair, what are the chances he flips to the Trojans or the Tide?
Yeah, Grace, per our Greg Biggins, a flip would not be unexpected. Jordan Lockhart gave a commitment to Ole Miss way back in January of 2021. Those early pledges rarely stick, especially when other schools enter the picture. Lockhart wants to take a couple visits. He'll be out at Alabama in early March. And when a commit says he's going to make a final decision, it usually doesn't bode well for whatever school currently has that pledge.
All right, Marcos Davila decommitted from TCU yesterday. Davila is the number 21 quarterback in the 2024 class, and he had been committed to the Horned Frogs since December. Jeremy Clark of Horned Frog Blitz reports that Garrett Riley's departure played a role in the decision. Blair, how could this affect the rest of the cycle?
Well, it certainly raises the stakes for new offensive coordinator Kendall Briles. TCU is battling Oklahoma and others for top 24/7 quarterback Michael Hawkins. And there was a new offer sent out to Luke Moga from the state of Arizona before Marcus Davila officially went back on the market. So there's a sense of urgency for TCU, which hopes to capitalize on its national championship game appearance.
2024 4-star athlete Aaron Butler has cut his list to 5. He will choose between Alabama, Colorado, Georgia, Oregon, and Washington. And he plans to make his final decision in April or May. So, Blair, where do you think he's leaning?
I like Georgia in this race. The former USC commit backed off the Trojans in January. He took an unofficial visit to Athens. That visit has given the Bulldogs a ton of momentum in the battle. Georgia has enough pull when they venture west of the Mississippi. And I would think that Aaron Butler is talented enough for them to make a huge priority early on in this cycle.
And Florida dealing with some coaching turnover, losing defensive coordinator Patrick Toney and tight end coach William Peagler to the NFL yesterday. And now today, reports saying wide receiver coach Kerry Colbert also headed to the league. Toney's position has been replaced. Former Alabama inside linebackers coach Austin Armstrong is the new DC. And with that, let's bring in our director of scouting, Andrew Ivins, to talk about all those changes with the Gators. Andrew, that's 3 assistants gone in a couple of days. Rare to see it right before the start of spring practice. From a recruiting standpoint, how big of a blow is this to the current cycle and beyond?
I think I think everyone needs to relax. We're going to be honest, right? You know, obviously it's not ideal. 2 weeks before spring practices, you're going to have to change some different pieces on the staff. But you look at that group, and no offense to Patrick Toney or Peagler or Kerry Colbert, but it wasn't really a who's who when it comes to recruiters. I think if there is one blow, it's probably Kerry Colbert heading off to the NFL. That's a guy that was at USC. He has developed some NFL wide receivers, Drake London, Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think he did an excellent job of selling young wideouts on the idea of coming to Florida, learning from him, and then going on to be drafted one day and playing on Sundays. You look at what he did in that 2023 cycle. He got Eugene Wilson, he got Andy Jean, Aiden Mizell. It was a great haul for them. So him leaving, I think it's a big deal. He was a guy that was tasked with recruiting Broward County down here in South Florida. Broward County has 3 big-time wide receivers in the upcoming 2024 cycle: Jeremiah Smith, Josiah Trader, Chance Robinson. All those guys had been up to Gainesville. So the Gators are going to need to find a new wide receivers coach, and more importantly, someone new to kind of be the point man in Broward County, which is such a fertile recruiting ground and an area that pretty much everyone in the country recruits.
The Gators went 6-7 last season, and obviously the Jaden Rashada situation was not very good PR for the Gators. Andrew, what's the perception now for Billy Napier as a recruiter and with this new staff, considering the changes with the assistants?
Well, I think the optics certainly have changed, right? A 6-7 season, disappointing, right? And then Florida is all in the media over the holidays and into the new year with the whole Jaden Rashada saga and how that played out. So I think it's kind of changed how outsiders view Billy Napier. I think it's kind of setting the stage where he's going to need to have a big 2023 on the field. And the Gators in that first month, they're going to go to Utah, they play Kentucky, and then they play Tennessee. I mean, those are 3 really talented programs. I think for Billy Napier, the biggest thing for him is going to be holding on to their quarterback commit, DJ Lagway, a top 247 talent for us. He's a bit of a freak athlete, kind of like Anthony Richardson, someone that can beat you with his arm and beat you with his legs. But I think Billy Napier, they got to keep selling the future. Him and his staff, they need to sell to the boosters, the alumni, that, hey, I'm the right guy. Just give me some time. Well, we loved what they did in 2023 on the recruiting trail. Right now in 2024, they sit number 11 in the rankings. They just had a few big junior days in January. I would anticipate all the top talent from the Sunshine State to continue to make its way to Gainesville. But Billy Napier is going to need to sign another big-time recruiting class, because I think that's going to only keep the people in the swamp happy and ensure that he gets year 3 there in Gainesville.
All right, well, you mentioned DJ Lagway, so let's talk about some of the other 2024 quarterbacks. Dylan Raiola, Jaden Davis, Elijah Brown, and CJ Carr, among others, highlight this group. Now, as you look at this class, how does it compare to last year's quarterback class and those of the past?
I'll preface this by saying it's early, right? I mean, we still got another 11 months to go before we finalize our rankings for the 2024 cycle. But having watched as much as we can, having seen what we have so far, I think it's a bit of a down year compared to last year. When you look at that 2023 cycle, remember we had the big 3, Nico Iamaleava, Dante Moore, Arch Manning. You also had Jackson Arnold in there. Malachi Nelson was another 5-star quarterback for us. I don't know if we're going to have 5 arms in our final 32 for the 2024 cycle. There's some guys we like, but it doesn't seem to be as top heavy. I also don't think it's as deep. I wouldn't be surprised if we had a smaller number of quarterbacks inside our final top 247. Again, things are going to change here over the next really 6 months. We're going to get some Elite 11 action. We're going to get more data points, more exposure. But right now it seems to be a bit of a down year. So if you're a fan of a school that has an arm firmly committed, I think you need to be smiling right now, because this doesn't really seem like the year maybe to grab a quarterback. That doesn't mean there isn't going to be some good ones that come from this, but it's not as fruitful as what we saw in that 2023 cycle.
Yeah, Andrew, and I feel like the market will be accelerated considering that, right? That maybe there aren't as many of arms, or the depth isn't there in terms of quality. So I think a lot of these schools are scrambling to get their guy in 2024 just because the bevy of options isn't there. Dylan Raiola is number 1, and obviously he's the number 1 overall prospect as well. But how big is the gap between Dylan Raiola and the rest of the quarterbacks chasing after him?
Blair, it's funny. I think if you asked me this question 2 months ago, I would have said it's pretty sizable. But having dug into the tape really on some of these top arms here over the past few weeks and studied game by game, I think that gap's shrinking a little bit. And I'm a big fan of Dylan Raiola. I mean, he is a big kid, 6'3", 228 pounds, like you know, Blair. He's got a live arm, but I think there was times as a senior where he struggled a little bit. State semifinals, you know, he only throws for 93 yards. His team doesn't score any points in a loss to end their season. So while we really, really like Raiola, you know, there's been some some times where I think we could get a little bit more out of him. And there's reports out there that he's going to be transferring to his third school in 3 years. So I don't think it's as big as it once was. I actually think that gap is closing a little bit, and we'll see what happens. Again, we're going to get the Elite 11 finals. We're going to get some more of these big OT7, 7-on-7 tournaments. And at the end of the day, the tape is everything. Is usually what we base a lot of this stuff off of, but it's going to be great to get Raiola, hopefully some of these other arms around each other, and then we can stack and rack them heading into their senior seasons.
So USC, Georgia, and Nebraska are the schools most closely linked to Raiola. There's reasons for all three to feel like they have a shot in this recruitment. Obviously, there's the family tie to Nebraska. But when it comes to playing at the next level, Andrew, how do you see him fitting in with these top contenders?
Grace, I think you can make a case for all three of these schools. If I was inside his camp and let's say I had a seat at the table, I think you could really outline, him being a fit at each one of them. At Nebraska, I mean, he would be the biggest recruit ever for Big Red. It would put them right back on the map right there with Matt Rule. I was listening to an interview with Marcus Satterfield, the new OC there, earlier today, and he brought up how they want to huddle up. That's what they're going to do at Nebraska. He wants to have a power run attack, and he's even going to have some formations with a fullback. And how would that fit in for our quarterback one? How would Dylan Raiola fit that? I think he fits it perfectly. You go back to his junior tape, he's handing the ball off a lot. There's a lot of play actions, and some of his best throws come on it when he's rolling out and the defense is biting forward. He's got a big arm. Like I said, he's super accurate. So I think Nebraska would make a ton of sense. I think he fits that pro style attack. He's gotten some snaps already under center, and they could cater and build everything around him. At Georgia, it's kind of the same thing. We've seen what Stetson Bennett has done. Obviously, Todd Monken's gone off to the NFL. In steps Mike Bobo. I don't think the Bulldogs are going to change much in terms of what they want to do on offense, right? They want to run the football. They're going to have a great offensive line. And then that quarterback, he's going to have to make a lot of throws that are timing, on schedule. And I think Dylan Raiola could do that. I also think if he goes to Georgia, I mean, that's his best bet for winning a national title. Obviously, they sign a ton of talent on offense, but defense, they continue to load up. That unit isn't dropping off anytime soon. Trust me on that. So I think at Georgia, if he wanted to win a national title, that's the school that makes the most sense for him. Now, if he wants to go number one overall in the NFL draft, you got to talk about USC and Lincoln Riley. I mean, his track record with quarterbacks is the best of the best. Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, Spencer Rattler. I mean, he has developed and coached up a lot of good guys. USC transitioning into the Big Ten here eventually. But they just signed one of my favorite wide receiver classes out there, Zachariah Branch, Jacoby Lane, a ton of talent there coming there. Blair, you've had your crystal ball on Deuce Robinson. They're going to score points, and it seems like it's fun to play in Lincoln Riley's system. So I think all three of those schools are great fits for him. I think he's a guy that doesn't need to play in a specific system. You can kind of insert him and let him flourish. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up.
Yeah, interesting, fascinating, I think is the word that comes to mind when you think about Dylan Raiola's recruitment. Moving away from Dylan Raiola, every year, Andrew, we look at the quarterbacks, and there's usually a late riser, a player that moves up the charts. Last cycle, I should say, was Jackson Arnold, who's at Oklahoma now. Who are some candidates for you in terms of being able to maybe rise in the quarterback ranks?
Well, the one name that keeps coming up in the 24/7 Sports scouting text thread is Air Noland. And I've charted a bunch of these quarterbacks here in 2024. No one has thrown as many passes on Friday nights as Air Noland. No one has thrown as many yards and touchdowns as him. He's thrown for 8,000 yards, over 100 touchdowns. This kid has a live arm. I know he's a left-handed, but he can really push the ball down the field. 28-3 on Friday nights as a starter, just led his team to a state title there in one of Georgia's highest classifications. I think he's a name that everyone needs to know, a guy that's going to continue to rise up in our rankings. Again, the production is there, the live reps are there, and he's got just one of those quick releases. So he too, I think, is someone that can play in a variety of different systems, someone to keep an eye on. CJ Carr is another one. And right before I hopped on this, I was watching CJ Carr, the Notre Dame commit, in one of his state playoff games. he was doing things that I had really not anticipated. I didn't think that was kind of in his arsenal. He's a big kid, over 6'2", 190 pounds, a grandson of Lloyd Carr. I always viewed him as more of a pocket passer, but you pop on the tape and he's escaping, making plays off schedule, off script. So CJ Carr, to me, I think I'm a little bit higher on him than maybe some of the other talent evaluators, but I've always been a fan. I think he has tools, and I think he's someone that can develop into potentially maybe even a first-round pick one day. So it's going to be interesting to see how far up we move Aaron Noland in the rankings, and then where does CJ Carr slot in, because I think both of those guys had really, really good junior seasons.
Aaron Noland's got the coolest quarterback name of all time, too, so he's got that going for him. Before I get to this last question, I want to ask everyone, please remember to like this video and join us in the chat. It's always a party in the chat, so subscribe to the channel so you can get in there and send us your questions, and we'll answer them for you at the end of the show. All right, Andrew, before we let you go, in the 2023 class, Dante Moore was viewed as the most game day ready, despite being ranked below Arch Manning and Nico Maliava. Who's the guy in this year's class who's ready to make an impact as a freshman?
Well, I mean, you could make a case that Aaron Noland would be the guy, right? Multi-year starter, just won a state title. Lot to like about him. But I'm going to go Elijah Brown here. He plays at Mater Dei. He's a 3-year starter there as well. Mater Dei is the only school that's had 3 Heisman Trophy winners. He is someone that is 29-1 as a starting quarterback. What's even more impressive about that, he is 9-1 against teams that are ranked inside the top 25, Max Prep's top 25. So he can win big games. Yes, sure, he's been surrounded by a ton of talent, but I watched the other day that one lone loss for him, and that came this past season against St. John Bosco. I thought he played good enough for his team to win. I mean, he's a gamer. He elevates the play of people around him. He makes really good decisions. He has the highest completion percentage of any of the quarterbacks in our inside our top 247 right now, just over 70%. So if the game is on the line, 2 minutes left, I think right now Elijah Brown is the guy I want in the huddle for me, because I think he is lights out under the lights.
All right, Andrew, appreciate you dropping your knowledge as usual. And you can catch more of Andrew Ivins and his co-host, Cooper Patagna, on the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast. They drop new episodes every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday morning on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, did you know Georgia spent almost $2 million more than the next school in recruiting costs? Cooper and Chris Singletary have a breakdown on the rising costs of recruiting the top talent.
Recruiting spending in college football keeps on ballooning. The national champions, Georgia Bulldogs, spent $4.5 million this last year in recruiting spending. The second team, Texas A&M, at $2.98. The Bulldogs, $1.7 million more in recruiting spending. If you want to know what recruiting spending is, transportation, lodging, meals, official visits, unofficial visits, post stamps, mailings, more and more. And we are joined by a guy that knows a thing or two about working on the recruiting side. That is Chris Singletary of 24/7 Sports. Chris, when you hear this much money being spent by the national champions, Georgia Bulldogs, consecutive national champions, is that just the cost of doing business in today's college football?
I think to a certain extent it is. To a certain extent it isn't. I think when you look at where Georgia's located, the amount of private planes that they're using in that southeast region to be able to touch multiple athletes, especially in that 5-star, 4-star range, is where you're getting a big tab of that. I think you also need to talk about the expansion in recruiting staffs. You're talking about the manpower that's needed across the board at these high-level blue blood programs. I think that's another place where a lot of this cost is becoming in play. And then now, because of the way the signing period is, it used to be in the day when I was coming out, everybody waited till their official visit. But now young men are making their decisions earlier. Therefore, you're having more unofficial visits. There's not a cap on the number of unofficial visits. So the more that they're on campus, the more guys that they're bringing on campus, the amount of people in terms of family, coaches, whoever's helping that young man make the decision are coming on campus for these official visits. Obviously, these things have turned into the official visit. So being able to accommodate the prospects, their families, show them different things while they're on campus. Again, the catering in terms of the different meals and things of that nature. All these things have escalated the cost of what we see today, which are astronomical numbers. in the whole world of recruiting.
Georgia, Texas A&M, Tennessee, Texas, Alabama, all within the top 5. Michigan as well, where you went to school, right there at number 6. How important is it for these blue blood programs to have what it feels like just unknowing resources in the recruiting game, and how much of an advantage is that for them, for schools who are knocking on the door, let's say like a TCU, that are trying to take that next step, but teams like this, like Georgia, Alabama, so on and so forth, seem to have this advantage where they can take private planes and send not only their head coach or coordinators, but their position coaches to schools on a short helicopter ride if need be. How much of an advantage is that built in for programs like that?
I think that's a huge advantage. I think you're looking at volume and quantity, along with, more importantly, the most thing and the biggest thing, which is quality. So you're looking at the schools in the SEC, location in terms of players in their area. So they want to be able to hit multiple players throughout the whole recruiting cycle. You look at TCU from their aspect, they're more of a niche in terms of where they're recruiting. It's obviously going to be the state of Texas. A lot of it's going to be Fort Worth, Arlington, Dallas, a lot of drive time instead of flying. So I think that's where their cost will be a little bit cheaper in terms of overall spending. But I think when you really look at it, it's not just spending the money, but spending the money smartly. And you look at some places, obviously Georgia, back-to-back national champs. At the end of the day, they say, hey, we have justification on why we're spending the amount of money, because look, at the end of the day, we're winning the biggest prize, which is the national title. But it's also about being smart about where you're spending your money. And at the end of the day, also with the private planes, is you want to be able to have the coach have a quality of life, be able to get in and out, be able to be at home every night. I'm sure they're doing a lot of football as well as recruiting. So now you're trying to maximize two worlds, not just the recruiting aspect, but also being able to be there for the current team, whether you're having off-season workouts, whether it's in spring ball, all those different things, even going to see recruits during the season, during bye weeks, or even if you're going during the season, in particular, you're playing in a particular state. Say you're playing at Florida and you're Georgia, so now you're going to play at the cocktail party, but hey, we want to go see these guys in Jacksonville that are playing, maybe some guys in the Orlando area, and then meet back up late Friday night or early Saturday morning before we play this game. So it's about being able to attack the plan, be efficient, to be able to, at the end of the day, close in on the prizes, which are the top players to help you win.
The Bulldogs, for the second consecutive year, not only national champions, but they also lead the country in recruiting spending. Chris, I got a hunch that the Bulldogs will probably be back in the same place next year when it comes to recruiting spending. Also got a hunch that they'll probably be in the mix for another college football playoff. Recruiting spending, is it getting too much? That's the reality of college football, and that's where we are right now.
No question. I mean, it's a battle of the have and the have-nots. And again, like I said, with Georgia, they show that they're spending in a way and it's working. Then you have some other places where, are you spending and it's been efficient? Are you spending from a standpoint of also where we're hitting on the hot butts? I think another reason that the spending has increased is you're now able to bring more people on campus. At one point in time, you only could pay for the prospect. Now you can pay for the prospect, the parents. If it's from a split family home, now you're paying for not only the prospect, but you're paying for mom and dad, if they're not married, and then another set of parents with mom and dad, also with siblings. So I think when you factor into those things in terms of overall cost, that's just caused the number in terms of spending to increase. But it's also, at the end of the day, forget all the spending. Do you have the proper plan? You can't just spend and not have the proper plan to reach the dividends and the benefits that you want. You see, Georgia has done that, and it's done well. You saw Texas A&M has done it 2 years ago. They had a little bit of attrition now. I'm curious to see how they are next year in terms of overall spending, the players that they get, and ultimately how do those guys translate into production on the field. And the same thing with Texas. Where do they fit into this whole piece of the pie in terms of spending a tremendous amount of money, and then how does it translate into the one-loss column for Coach Sark down there in Austin?
Spend more money, win more games. Maybe that's the truth. We saw that with Georgia, certainly Alabama, Texas, wait and see mode, Michigan on the heels of 2 consecutive college football playoff appearances. The outlier here, Texas A&M, we'll see what happens with them. They're not afraid to spend money. So there you have it, college football, the era of dropping dough.
All right, fascinating conversation there. Let's continue introducing the top prospects in the 2024 class by region. And Blair, today we are looking at Arizona, Utah, and Hawaii. Blair, besides being a star on this show, you are an expert in that region. Now, these states have seen large growth in Power 5 talent in recent years. Why do you think that is?
Well, there's population growth in a place like Phoenix, Arizona. It's one of the greatest or biggest growing cities in America. And when you think about families and players moving over to the state of Arizona from places like Southern California, naturally you're going to have a talent influx. You're going to have more players. You look at a state like Hawaii, which now has Marcus Mariota to look up to, or a Tua Tagovailoa, and the players want to follow in their footsteps and go to a big-time college. And so they take up football maybe at a younger age. And then a state like Utah, which doesn't even have an NFL team, it's a football crazy state. Anytime you go at any point in the year, you have to probably find someone playing football out in a field, or, you know, I think when you go out to games on Friday nights in Salt Lake City, it's a huge ordeal. 2 of the top 7 picks a couple years ago were from the state of Utah, and Zachary Wilson and Penei Sewell. So it's another state that's really producing a lot of talent. And I think now we're starting to see it's not just about California or the Bay Area or even the Pacific Northwest, but I think coaches and recruiters are starting to take notice of other parts of the West region as well.
Hey, you're right about Phoenix. It is so hard to leave every time I visit there. What a city. Let's look at some of the prospects in this region, though, starting with Elijah Rushing, the top edge in the class, 10th overall in 2024. What makes this 5-star such a dominant force on the defensive line?
For me, it's his length and it's his physical upside. He's got all the explosiveness that you like to see from an edge rusher. The NFL has transformed into a passing league and a quarterback league specifically. And to offset that, teams are obviously looking for the quarterback chasers, the pass rushers, the player that's going to get to the pocket. And Elijah Rushing is that type of player. He has all the tools physically. And when you think about him and you project him out 3 or 4 years, you look at a player who's about 6'5", 230, 235, and with that quickness, with that first step, with that length, he's got the pedigree. His father was a tight end at Florida in the early 1990s. He checks off every box that you want to see from those elite edge rushers. And obviously you see with his offer sheet, you know, past the 30 offer mark and taking a ton of visits. I think he's a player that every school in the country would love to have.
All right, I'm told we are 10 likes away from 50 on this video. So come on, give us 10 more. I know you guys can do it. All right, Blair, you've discussed this player before, and it's a name that may be familiar to our East Coast viewers. 4-star quarterback Isaac Wilson, yes, the brother of Jets QB Zach Wilson. What is it about Isaac's play on the field that makes him the top-ranked player in the state of Utah?
It's his gunslinger mentality that impresses me the most. He backed up Jackson Dart, who's now at Ole Miss via USC. As a freshman, he backed up Devin Brown, who's now the heir apparent, it looks like, at Ohio State. As a sophomore, he took the reins as a junior, and all he did was pass for over 3,700 yards and 40 touchdowns. I love his composure. I love his ability to thread the needle and fit passes in between windows and hitting receivers at different levels of the field. And I think one thing we don't give him enough credit for is his athleticism. He can sneak up on you and pick up some first downs with his legs. I think he's really smart in the open field. He slides and he kind of gets small when he has to. But he has, I think, a lot of really good tools to work with. He's got a quick release. His reactions and his footwork in the pocket is really precise. And I think he's a player that is only going to keep getting better as he gets more reps. He gets more experience. I mentioned earlier he had to back up a couple Power 5 quarterbacks as a freshman and a sophomore. So we're looking forward to seeing him as a senior this coming fall.
Another player that comes from a bloodline with college and NFL experience in it is Jeremiah Newcombe out of Queen Creek, Arizona. His brother, a DB at UCLA, and his father, a former NFL 6th-round draft pick out of Nebraska. So how does Jeremiah project at the next level?
Yeah, he's going to be, I think, one of the better defensive backs in this class out west. He's really twitched up. I think back to a term that, you know, Andrew Ivins likes to use, and he's very traitsy. He's a player who has the speed, he has the fluidity as a cornerback. He can really make things happen in the open field, and he's got that two-way production that we want to see. He can contribute on the offensive side of the ball as well. He's a really, really good weapon in special teams as a kick returner. So, I think you look at the overall tool set, you look at I think everything that you look for in terms of the lineage and the bloodlines. You mentioned his brother being at UCLA. His father was a quarterback at Nebraska. And, for all the talk that we make about Dylan Raiola possibly being the biggest target for Nebraska, well, how about Jeremiah Newcombe? He's another legacy there in the state of Arizona, and he's got, I think, a lot to look forward to here in this spring and this summer in terms of his recruiting process, because he's got a bevy of options as well.
All right, maybe some more QB dominoes to look at. All right, let's finish with the number one player in the state of Hawaii, Preston Taumua, standing tall at 6'4", 350 pounds. He is quite the hefty O-lineman. Now, it seems like a challenge for Hawaiian players to be noticed because of the distance. How has he been able to differentiate himself and shine in the trenches?
He's been really good anytime we've seen him. We first got our eye on him, me and Brandon Huffman, out in Maui last summer. He had no Power 5 offers. Now he's got a number of SEC schools after his signature, a bunch of programs from up and down the West Coast that want to make him the featured lineman in their class in this group. And he's just super athletic for his size. You mentioned how big he is. He's really nimble-footed. I think he has a lot of really good athleticism, functional strength. He's able to use his hands to combat pass rushers, and he's able to keep defenders in front of him, which is a huge thing for him. And he's been able to do it playing offensive tackle at the high school level and even in the camp and showcase circuit. But I think his best position at the next level will be guard, and I think that really fits him well. He's super athletic, a really good run blocker, and he's only going to get bigger. We talk about him being big already, but he's only going to get bigger and stronger. And I think he has all the tools to be the number one offensive guard in this class.
All right, well, let's go to the other side of the country now and take a look at the top 5 2024 classes in the ACC to this point in the cycle. Louisville ranks 4th with just 2 commits, but they are big gets with 5-star edge TJ Capers and 4-star running back Isaac Brown. And to talk more about Louisville's 2024 recruiting outlook, let's bring in the expert, Michael McCammon, staff writer for Cardinal Authority. Michael, thanks so much for joining us today. Now, Louisville hired Jeff Brohm in December, late into the 2023 cycle. Wasn't able to keep everyone committed, but he did keep a large portion of that class, including 4-star quarterback Pierce Clarkson. How important was it for Brohm to keep that class intact heading into his first year?
It was really huge, because that was a lot of where the Louisville football momentum had been recently. They'd done a little bit better on the field, but really most of the momentum was off the field and on the recruiting trail. And so with that coaching change, as is the case whenever there's a coaching change, you want to keep as much as your class intact as possible, especially when it's one where Louisville was hitting new heights as far as we're talking average prospect ranking and things like that than the program really ever has in the recruiting cycle. So when Jeff Brohm came in, he made it a priority to hop on a plane, get out to California, go see the St. John Bosco State Championship game, and get his eyes and have an opportunity to say hello and continue to really start to form that relationship with the guys that were in that class, and certainly did a fantastic job, as you mentioned, hanging on to just about all of them, including Pierce Clarkson, the big-time get, the quarterback from St. John Bosco.
Michael, it's very early right now in the 2024 cycle, and obviously in Jeff Brohm's tenure, but I'm sure you've noticed some tendencies or you've noticed, I think, some trends in terms of what he's able to do as a recruiter. He has 2 commitments in 2024, both from the state of Florida. What has stood out to you about his recruiting approach?
Yeah, I think right there gives you one big hint to their approach, and that is Louisville's going to hit South Florida, and they're going to continue to hit it hard. Since he has been on campus, Jeff Brohm has basically had his entire staff spend time down visiting high schools throughout the South Florida area. And clearly Louisville's got a long history of success in producing or taking Florida products to another level, starting with Lamar Jackson, Teddy Bridgewater, and the list can go on and on and on as well. So they're going to flex their muscle a little bit on the history there as well. And then they've got a recruiting coordinator, John Herron, that's on their staff, who has a lot of connections throughout the state of Florida, especially South Florida, that's really working to their advantage as well. So the Flyville 24, they're calling it now. There was a Flyville 23 with all the California kids. Now they're calling it Flyville 24. And a lot of the emphasis will be on the Sunshine State, and particularly down in South Florida. And then you mentioned TJ Capers, obviously a top 10 get for the Cardinals early on, just a stud 5-star kid for the Cardinals. But how much they want him or really like the South Florida area, I wrote them down because I want to make sure I don't forget anybody. But they've already also offered a number of his teammates, wide receiver Jose Leon, tight end Benjamin Blackman, and defensive lineman Dalen Russell. So that's a priority area that Miami, Homestead, and that whole Fort Lauderdale area for the Cardinals this year for sure.
Well, Michael, you kind of just touched on it, but TJ Capers, the most recent commit, second best edge rusher in the country, his decision came in January, and he picked Louisville over Bama, Miami, Colorado, Georgia, big names there. So you mentioned some of his teammates there, but how important is it to have someone of his stature already in the class helping to recruit more classmates?
I tell you what, I was actually in San Antonio for the All-American Bowl. He wasn't there, but the announcement was made via stream when the event was going on. But still, a lot of us gathered around the announcement table and watched it as it was live. And that right there is an example of how much of an impact a commitment like TJ Capers can be to Louisville. The exposure that brings, especially when there was multiple guys already committed to Louisville playing in the 23 version of the All-American Bowl game. So his ability to do it on national television, and then kind of be kind of a ringleader and one of the guys down in South Florida, like, hey guys, come follow me. As I mentioned, a bunch of his teammates offered, as well as a number of other guys, throughout that area in the Miami area. So to have somebody that's ranked, in the top 15, top 10 nationally, sitting there singing your praises in one of the hotbed recruiting areas for the country is certainly should, at least on paper, looks like it will create benefits for Jeff Brohm and his staff.
Michael, as you know, I'm West Coast based, and in the 2023 recruiting cycle, I kept getting tagged in a bunch of offers. Louisville. I mean, Louisville was super active out west, and they had obviously some success, right, with Pierce Clarkson, Aaron Williams, a couple others. A top target right now in 2024 is 4-star corner Marcellus Williams from St. John Bosco. What's the latest on him and Louisville's chances of plucking another top player from the West region?
Just like those guys, I think it's going to be a very long battle. I think it's going to be very difficult, but Louisville, because of the relationships that it started forming, as you mentioned in the last class, and they've been working with him, recruiting him just as hard as they did those 23 kids for quite a while now. He's visited Louisville. I anticipate he'll make another visit, if not more than one, depending on how long he wants his recruiting process to go on. But certainly a top 100 kid, a cornerback that you can, that coaches just love to have in their secondary. So I like Louisville's chances again. I'm nowhere near in a spot to put up a crystal ball for any program. I mean, you could look at his list of scholarship offers and throw a dart to some of the top P5 programs, and you're going to hit one for sure. So, but certainly a guy, because of those relationships that they have formed, having some former teammates on the roster there, and especially if they start to continue to speak highly of Louisville as they have that experience on campus, I think speaks well for Louisville as they continue to fight some of the nation's best for him.
So before this coaching change, Louisville had a top 25 class in 2023, but ended up finishing 35th in the team recruiting rankings and 5th in the ACC. So Michael, as you project the rest of this cycle, what's the ceiling for 2024?
I think they can continue to compete with 2025, with the top 25 recruiting class. Obviously, when you have the two that are starting them off right now, I mean, they're currently sitting at number 25 with just 2 commitments. That is a very strong start for Louisville. And again, and they're trying to do it kind of a little bit. It's not as uncharted territory now because they've done a little bit of it, which again is something that you need to do if you want to have that type of attention for some of the top prospects. So having pulled some of those guys in for the 23 class and Jeff Brohm being able to hang on to them, I think they're right in line to continue to snag some of the best from South Florida. I think he'll look in the Kentucky area and throughout this region, as well as potentially, hopefully, pull another one or two from St. John Bosco. And if they can do that, I think they're fighting for another top 25 class.
All right, and we'll be watching. Thanks, Michael, for your time and for more of his work and more updates on Louisville. Be sure to check out Cardinal Authority on 247sports.com. All right, Blair, what do you say we get to some viewer questions?
Let's do it.
All right. Everyone watching, remember, send them in the chat because we're taking all the cues. You got to subscribe to the channel first if you want to join the little chat party. So, Blair, let's start with a question from Hannah G. Okay, we're going back to Florida here. How much do you think the coaching changes will impact Florida recruiting in the 2024 cycle?
I don't think it'll impact it much, if at all. We're in February, right? And we've still got about 9 months to go until really everything starts to settle in for that early signing period in December. And it happens so early that I think Billy Napier can pivot and he can make the changes or really attack certain positions the way he wants to. I feel like getting DJ Lagway as early as they did is probably the big offsetter. It's the reason why recruits would look at Georgia or look at Florida and look at playing for Billy Napier in the Swamp. And I think as long as he continues to make noise, I think I mentioned earlier this week, or maybe it was on the show last week, DJ Lagway will have an opportunity this offseason at showcases, at the Elite 11, at various camps to make noise and rise in the quarterback rankings. If he's able to do that, I think it gives Billy Napier a ton of ammo and says, hey, look, come play with DJ Lagway, come play for us and score touchdowns. So I think it's going to be important in that sense. The assistant coaches, I think there's so much movement now in college football, and that continuity is kind of a thing in the past. And these recruits understand that it's a business. So, I think it's going to be, another thing that they can just kind of get over and really move on to the next guy.
Continuity is a thing of the past. If we could sum up college football in one phrase, that would be it. All right, a question from Tyler Chambers. How do Elijah Brown and Dylan Raiola compare at the top of the QB board out west?
Yeah, two different types of quarterbacks, I would say. I think Dylan Raiola, from an arm talent standpoint, from a physical standpoint, is unmatched. And I think that's why he's projected so well, right? I think that's why his upside and why he's the number one player in this 2024 class. You look at him 3 or 4 years down the road, and you look at him and you say, okay, he's the guy. Elijah Brown is more of a work in progress. I'm not sure he's a big weight room player, but I think headiness, his technique, he's just super smart under behind the pocket, and I think he makes all the right decisions and has really good accuracy as well. That's a big thing for quarterbacks, is being able not only to get the ball out quickly, but get the ball out to the receivers so they can make a play upfield. And he does it just as good as anyone in this 2024 class. So two different types of players. I think we side with Dylan Raiola just because of that projectability. But Elijah Brown has proven time and time again that he's a gamer, that he loves to compete, and that usually, like Andrew says, he comes out on top as the winner. So I think any school that lands either of those quarterbacks should be thrilled about what they do in 2024.
All right, our next question from JJ24, and we are going back to your region. Do you think this 2024 group in your region, Blair, is as good as the 2023 group? Because remember, Utah was loaded last cycle.
Yeah, I don't know if it's as good. I think at least early on, we haven't been able to go out to the camps or the showcases or things like that. That all starts up here in the next several weeks. But, missing is the big 5-star wide receiver, Zachariah Brands from the state of Nevada, right? We don't have that in this cycle. You look at even the state of Arizona, which had Deuce Robinson, but obviously in this class, you have Dylan Raiola, the number one quarterback. You have Elijah Rushing, the number one edge rusher. So it's kind of give or take. I don't know if the numbers are quite there. The quality is pretty good at the top, but I'm not sure there's as much depth or as many players that some of these college programs will go after. But everything can change. There could be a late riser, a late emerger, a player that maybe starts to catch attention or bloomed a little bit later than his peers. And that's always, I think, the fun part of every recruiting cycle is to start to see that player in the spring evaluation period who's making all the noise. And I think that's what I'm looking forward to most about this 2024 class.
Yeah, there's always some late bloomers. We'll be looking forward to the reports coming out of those camps pretty soon. Let's go to Braum's Cards. Again, Blair, you mentioned your West Coast base. Louisville went hard in Cali in 2023. Do you think Louisville will continue to attack the West Coast now that Jeff Brohm is running the show?
I think it was very indicative of Jeff Brohm making it out to California shortly after taking the job and making sure he was on the sideline to see Pierce Clarkson play in person, right? That's the face of that class. He's I think the originator of Flyville and that movement. And so for him to make that move and to go in and really show his face that early was, I think, a suggestion that he will be going back to the West Coast and he will be trying to pluck a lot of the top talent from the region. I think it's important for him to not only obviously recruit some of the areas that he's familiar with, but to branch out and to make Louisville a national brand, to make it appealing to the West Coast recruit, which will have plenty of West Coast flavor on the roster. I think that could make an impact down the road. You know, you project out 2 or 3 years from now when Pierce Clarkson is on the field, you know, who's going to be watching? It's going to be that West Coast recruit that maybe wants to go out and be the next Pierce Clarkson. So I think, you know, you have to establish those roots. And I would be stunned if he's not trying to be a major presence, not only in the state of California, but up and down the West Coast.
All right, our next one from Adam S. And this is a fun one because we know everyone was obsessed with Nicholas Harbor the past cycle. Do you have any early picks for who this year's Nicholas Harbor could be, aka the freakiest player in the class?
I haven't seen too many players that even match up to what Nicholas Harbor was. Obviously an Olympic hopeful and everything, but I think one player that really stuck out to me recently when I saw him at the Battle of Las Vegas was David Hall. He's from the state of Nebraska. Famously, obviously, Malachi Coleman stayed close to home and played for the Huskers. I was super impressed with David Hall and what he's able to do. I think he's that jumbo athlete that really kind of reminds me of what Nicholas Harbor was. Won't be as fast. That's crazy elite speed. That's world-class athleticism. But when you think of just sheer size and that athleticism and that mobility, I would not be shocked to see David Hall become a higher priority for a lot of schools here in the coming months.
Okay, that'll be a fun one to watch. But yeah, Harbor, one of a kind in every way. Kind of hard to replicate that. Next question from Andrew M. Are the modern-day tackles Brandon Baker and DeAndre Carter a package deal, or could they do their own thing?
I think they're going to be doing their own thing, and you know, that's not to say they won't end up at the same school, but I think they're approaching the process independently, and you know, they're both really savvy when it comes to the recruiting game and going out on visits and making sure that they're making the right decisions. They have a number of SEC programs after their signatures, and then you think about the two schools out west that are making a strong push for them. That would be USC and Oregon. You know, both those schools want to keep that in-state California talent closer to the West region in Pac-12, or I guess soon to be Big Ten country. But you know, I think the difference right now is that Oregon had to hire a new offensive line coach. Adrian Clem went off to the NFL. We'll see whether that sets them back in the pursuit of both Carter and Baker. But I think they are going through the process independently, going out and taking visits. They've been on a number of schools and a number of trips together, but I'm not sure they are completely set on playing together at the next level.
Well, you mentioned the West Coast now being Big Ten country, so that leads us perfectly into this next question from Ben G. With realignment happening in the year 24, are players in regions more likely to stay closer to home or continue to go far?
I think they're going to go far, and the reason why is because they don't need to stay close to home anymore to play in that region, right? So look at a player like Dante Moore, who ends up choosing Oregon initially and then ends up choosing UCLA, which will be a Big Ten school. And the big thing that stood out to him was, hey, I'm going to be able to play my road games in my own backyard. I'm going to know all these kids from the Big Ten schools. And so I think as conference realignment and all that kind of that comes with the changes and just the super conferences, if we want to call them that, it's going to make it an appealing destination for these players. Every game now is on national television. You don't have to go to a big school to be seen or to have the spotlight on you. But I think a lot of players now realize that as NIL grows and as your brand appeal grows, the broader your audience, the bigger your reach is, and the better NIL deal you will get. So, you know, as long as that is still on the table, I think players will go wherever that means that it's going to have kind of the more benefit for them.
Okay, and we're going back to the 2023 cycle with this one. Question from DJ Dog 31. Will Deuce signing with one of the top 5 2023 classes, will that move the school in the overall rankings?
Well, it could obviously help Georgia a little bit, but obviously I don't think they're going to be able to catch up with Alabama and that monster class that Nick Saban was able to reel in. USC would move up, but doing the calculations, not sure that would really move the needle for them in terms of being a top 5 class. So, although he is still a big fish out there and he does want to make a decision here in the next month or so, I'm not sure it's going to have too much of an effect on the overall team rankings for the 2023 cycle. But I'm sure that doesn't matter to whichever school ends up getting his signature, right? I think those coaches, the assistants, and the fan base as a whole, whichever that fan base is, they will be doing backflips because Deuce Robinson is that type of player and that type of talent.
Lots of backflips. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for sending in those questions. And remember to subscribe to the channel. That's the only way to send them in. So if we didn't get you today, I promise we'll get to them in another show. And thank you, everybody, for watching. That's going to do it for us today. For Blair Angulo, I'm Grace Remington. Have a great night, and we'll see you next week.